The late afternoon sun spilled in golden shafts across the cobbled street, where the little café breathed with the quiet hum of life. A place where the world seemed to pause for a moment between the bustle of the city and the stillness of unspoken emotions. And there, by the entrance, framed in soft light that touched her like a fragile blessing, sat a young woman whose beauty was not diminished by the wheelchair she occupied, but rather magnified in a heartbreaking, poetic way. For her long blonde hair had been woven into a braid that rested gently over her shoulder, and her dress, white and flowing like a whisper of innocence, cascaded around her in delicate folds that stirred with the faint breeze. And though her legs no longer carried her into the dance of life the way they once had, her presence carried a strength that made even strangers lower their voices when they passed, as though they had stumbled into a sacred place. And she sat with her hands folded on her lap, her pale fingers occasionally trembling as her eyes, blue and full of memories she could not quite silence, fixed themselves on the little girl who stood a few steps away, a child no older than 7, clutching a well-worn teddy bear against her chest, as though the stuffed creature could absorb every fear and hope she carried in her small body. Her dress a cheerful yellow that glowed under the soft light, her pink leggings peeking from beneath its hem like a bright reminder of childhood innocence. And she tilted her head upward to gaze at the man beside her, a man who looked as though he had been carved out of some unyielding, yet tender story of fate, tall and broad-shouldered, his fitted gray t-shirt clinging to the kind of muscles built not in gyms, but in the quiet determination of a life lived with hardship and persistence, his jeans worn in places that told of long days of work and nights of restless wandering, his strong hand wrapped protectively around the child's much smaller one, his other hand twitching slightly at his side as though he wanted to reach out and bridge the aching distance between himself and the woman in the wheelchair. But for the moment he only stood still, his dark hair catching the sunlight, his eyes locked on hers with a longing so raw it felt almost too intimate for the open air. And the cafe, with its murmuring customers and drifting scents of roasted coffee, faded into silence around them, because what truly existed in that fragile moment was not the clinking of cups or the shuffling of footsteps, but the unspoken story between 3 souls bound by fate, a story etched into the very air they breathed. And as the woman blinked, her lashes heavy with unshed tears, she allowed herself to remember what it had felt like before life had fractured into before and after, when she could run and dance and chase the little girl through fields of wildflowers without wheels beneath her, when she could stand beside the man she now dared not name in her heart without this sharp distance between them, when love had seemed simple and endless and not carved out of pain and sacrifice. But now everything was different, and yet here they were, caught in this moment that felt like both a punishment and a gift. Because as the child pressed her face into the teddy bear for courage and looked back at the woman with eyes so much like her own, eyes that carried both fear and wonder, it was as if destiny itself had chosen this small cafe doorway as the place where truth would unfold. And the man finally drew in a deep breath, his chest rising with the weight of words he had carried for too long, words that trembled at the edge of his tongue, words she both longed for and feared. And though he said nothing yet, the space between them became a battlefield of emotions where hope clashed with regret. And the woman gripped the armrest of her wheelchair as though it might steady the storm inside her, while her lips parted slightly, a silent invitation, a silent plea, a silent forgiveness waiting to be spoken. And in that suspended heartbeat, the world did not know that a love as fragile as porcelain yet as enduring as stone was breathing again. Even if it hurt, even if it risked breaking them all over again. Because some loves were not meant to die even when fate tried to bury them beneath tragedy. Some loves lingered like scars, like breath, like destiny that refused to let go. And as the silence stretched, the cafe door creaked faintly behind them and someone passed by carrying a tray of steaming mugs. But none of the 3 turned to notice, for they were locked in a moment that seemed carved out of time, a fragile space where every breath mattered. And the little girl shifted her weight nervously, her teddy bear squished tighter against her chest, as though even in her innocence she understood the magnitude of what hovered between her mother and the man beside her. And the man finally crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to the child, brushing a thumb across her small hand, as if grounding himself in her warmth before he let his eyes return to the woman in the wheelchair. Eyes that softened from the steel of years, spent alone into something gentler, vulnerable. And she felt her breath catch because she remembered those eyes from another life, the life before the accident, before the endless nights in hospital rooms where machines hummed and her body betrayed her. before the loneliness that crept like ivy across her heart. And she remembered his laughter and the way he used to hold her hand as though he never planned to let go. And now here he was, inches away but oceans apart, carrying the weight of choices neither of them had been ready for. And the girl, too perceptive for her age, tugged gently at his hand, whispering a question too soft for others to hear but loud enough to pierce the woman's soul. "Is she really my mama?" And though the words trembled like the fragile wings of a bird, they shattered the invisible walls built from silence, for the woman's lips parted in a sob that she tried to swallow, her hand rising slightly as though reaching for the child, and the man closed his eyes for a brief moment, a flash of guilt crossing his features as if he blamed himself for the years lost, for the broken promises, for the distance that had forced a child to grow up with questions instead of certainties. But when he opened them again, there was a determination that had not been there before, a fierce decision that if destiny had given them this moment, he would not waste it, and he stepped forward, pulling the girl gently so she stood between him and the woman, their triangle complete. And for the first time the child looked at the woman fully, not with shy glances but with searching eyes. And what she saw there was not weakness but a reflection of her own soul, the same curve of lips, the same delicate shape of eyes, the same thread of blood and spirit that no distance or accident could erase, and slowly, with hands that trembled more than she wished, the woman extended her fingers toward the child, and the teddy bear slipped from the little girl's grasp, tumbling silently to the cobbled ground, forgotten as she reached forward, her tiny hand fitting into the woman's fragile one like a missing piece that had been waiting all these years. And tears slid down both their faces, mirroring each other, and the man felt his throat tighten as he watched them. His two worlds finally collide, his heart breaking and healing in the same breath, because he had carried the burden of keeping them apart out of fear of rejection, fear of pain, but here they were, proving that love was stronger than fear. And as the child climbed onto the woman's lap awkwardly but determinedly, curling into her embrace despite the wheelchair, despite the awkward angles, the woman held her as if she were made of starlight, as if the universe had given her a second chance, and for a moment the world around them blurred, the café, the strangers, the passing cars. All of it fell away, until it was only them, mother, daughter, and the man who had loved them both in his own fractured way, standing like a guardian on the threshold of a new chapter. And he reached out then, unable to resist, his hand brushing over the woman's shoulder, his touch tentative as if asking for permission. And when she did not flinch, when instead she leaned ever so slightly into him, his chest swelled with a hope he thought he had lost forever, and though no words were spoken, everything was said in that one shared breath, that one trembling connection, that one fragile embrace of three hearts finding their way back together beneath the forgiving light of evening. And as the dusk began to stretch its lavender arms across the sky, painting the world in soft shades of fading light, the three of them remained gathered in that fragile constellation of love reborn, none of them willing to move, for they knew that any step might break the magic, yet the magic itself was too strong to vanish, and the woman in the wheelchair pressed her cheek against her daughter's hair, inhaling the scent of innocence and sunlight, letting it anchor her to the earth in a way no medicine or therapy ever could. Because in that moment, she was not defined by the steel frame beneath her or the scars she carried, but by the bond that pulsed like fire through her veins. And the man stood beside them with tears burning unashamed in his eyes, his hand never leaving her shoulder now, his thumb tracing slow circles as if reminding himself that she was here, real, alive. And though the years apart had carved deep wounds, he could feel the slow stitching of forgiveness in her presence. For love, when true, did not vanish with time or tragedy but endured like stone weathered by storms. And he found himself speaking at last, his voice low, rough with the weight of years, telling her he was sorry, telling her he had never stopped loving her, telling her that he had been a coward for keeping their daughter away in fear that rejection would crush them all, but that he could no longer deny what was written into their souls. And the woman listened, tears sliding silently down her cheeks, her hand clutching their daughter tighter as if afraid she might vanish. And then, with the gentlest of whispers, she told him she had waited, that every lonely night she had dreamed of this moment, that she had hated him and loved him in equal measure, but most of all she had missed him. And their daughter lifted her head from her embrace, confusion flickering in her wide eyes as she whispered, "Does this mean we can be together now?" And her words, innocent and pure, became the bridge across all the brokenness, and the woman smiled through her tears, nodding, while the man laughed softly, shakily, as though he had been holding his breath for years and could finally exhale. and he bent down, wrapping his arms around both of them, careful yet desperate, pulling them into a circle of warmth that no shadow could touch. And for the first time in what felt like forever, they were whole. And as night settled in and the cafe lights blinked on, casting golden halos around the tables, the three of them remained in their embrace, drawing curious glances but not caring. For they had reclaimed something greater than pride or fear. They had reclaimed love, and though the road ahead would not be easy, there would be whispers. There would be struggles. There would be nights when the past threatened to unravel the fragile threads they were weaving anew. They had each other, and that was enough. For family was not defined by perfection but by persistence, not by ease but by endurance. And as the little girl nestled once more into her mother's arms, sleep tugging at her eyes, the woman brushed a kiss across her forehead, whispering promises she had once thought she would never get to make. And the man leaned close, his lips brushing the crown of her hair, whispering that they would face it all together, no matter what, and the stars above seemed to listen, the universe itself bearing witness to the rebirth of a love story it had refused to let die. And so, beneath the soft hum of the cafe, with the city alive around them and the night unfolding like a tender song, they began again, not as broken pieces but as a whole greater than the sum of its scars, not as strangers bound by regret, but as a family stitched together by fate, hope, and the kind of love that outlives even the cruelest storms. A love that, like the steady beating of a heart, would endure forever.